Hi guys, Shauna Hall here for this week's discussion thread on our research presentations and projects. The main focus of my project is to examine the relationship between the Tea Act of 1773 and the Boston Tea Party. And it actually goes all the way back to the French and Indian War. And I found the book that we had to read for class to be very interesting by the author Nick Bunker. And then due to the cost of the war, the king needed more revenue. In addition to increasing the taxes, there was also the dilemma for the British East India Company, who was about to go bankrupt. Both of these events are linked to the creation of the Tea Act of 1773. Parliament was trying to kill two birds, needing revenue and supporting the British East India Company with one stone, which is the passing of the Tea Act. Not only did the Boston Tea Party protest, not only did I analyze the Boston Tea Party protest, but I also looked at the effects. So really the big theme was cause and effect relationships. And one of the effects was the Coercive Act as a direct result of this protest, and eventually will lead to the Declaration of Independence. And there's a list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence that mentions some of the parts in the coercive acts. So again, the theme, cause and effect relationship between the Tea Act of 1773 and the Boston Tea Party. And why is cause and effect connection so important? We have our students do it all the time. And so that was kind of where my brain was going of this topic, of this theme. And the definition, just from dictionary.com, of cause and effect, noting a relationship between actions or events such that one or more are the result of the other or others. There's a foundation in studying any time period. So where did it start? What event started? And then what did it cause? So make those connections between past events and or historical figures significant. And then what would happen if, I always ask my students that question as well. We're going over the 12th Amendment right now in my government class. And what would happen if the 12th Amendment was never created? And so we had to go back in time to figure out how they used to do it before the 12th Amendment. So all those things are really interesting. Again, the cause and effect relationship of anything historical. So some of my findings, and I found a lot, and I thoroughly enjoyed the research. So these are just a few. It all started due to the French and Indian War. King and Parliament needed new taxes, and then new land gained by the British, but would not allow the American colonists to move westward. That part I found really interesting, but it doesn't necessarily align with the Boston Tea Party. So I did not actually put that in my research. But again, it was just something I found interesting. And then the significance of the British East India Company. And then I found a quote by Edmund Burke in Nick Bunker's book. Tea is perhaps the most important object or any in the mighty circle of our commerce. So again, tea itself is extremely important, whether it's socially, economically, in this case, historically. So it goes back to tea. Tea was consumed so much that trade with China increased, but eventually the supply of it far exceeded the amount that Europe could absorb. So now you start seeing the economics piece, and this was going to bankrupt the company because they have so much surplus. So a few of the key players I mentioned more in detail in my project, but King George III, obviously, Lord North, the Prime Minister during this time, which Lord North actually had more of an influence than King George III, because King George III was more of a key figure, not necessarily pushing these through Parliament. John Adams' his journal entries are some of the primary source documents I will be using. Benjamin Franklin, his part was very interesting because he was in London at the time. And what do? You're called before Parliament. Hey, your patriots did this. What are you going to do about it? And so his perspective was interesting because he was not in Boston at the time. And then Samuel Adams helped plan the Boston Tea Party, but he actually didn't partake in the event itself. And then Paul Revere took part in the Boston Tea Party protest against the Tea Act of 1773. So, for the conclusion, the Tea Act of 1773 directly did contribute to the Boston Tea Party protest, to the coercive acts of 1774, and then eventually to the colonists declaring their independence. So, if I go back to my theme, my goal, why is this cause and effect connection so important? It changed the world. And you often wonder, back to that question, if this didn't happen, would we have still had independence? Now, again, tea was not the only thing, and taxes were not the only thing. And you had the Boston Massacre, you had the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the Battle of Bunker Hill, like you had other things. But this was tea itself, and the Tea Act was extremely significant, which had that cause and effect connection. The last thing I'll talk about is the amazing resources. Again, Nick Bunker's book, I wish I would have known about it for years because I would have read it for fun. I found it very, very interesting, and the connections that he made helped me better understand it. And then John Adams' personal diary, I found that interesting. And then John Hersey, the Boston Tea Party's Principles and Heroes. And there's multiple primary source documents and viewpoints within it that he analyzes. And so I found that one to be very helpful when doing this project.